warning, senior staff only. Those words hung in the conference room like smoke from a cigarette you can't put out. I stood there holding my patent portfolio folder, the one containing 15 months of AI framework development that had just generated $47 million in new licensing deals. The same framework they were about to celebrate without mentioning my name. My name is Garrett Walsh. I'm 49 years old, and until that Tuesday morning, I was the senior data engineering manager at Apex Technologies. 23 years I'd been building their IP infrastructure from the ground up, 15 patents filed, core algorithms that powered their entire machine learning division, but apparently, senior staff meetings were now above my pay grade. There must be some mistake, I said, adjusting the stack of technical specifications in my hands. It's a habit I've had since graduate school, organizing papers when my brain needs time to process. The quarterly IP review covers my framework implementations. Bryce Hoffman, our VP of Engineering, barely looked up from his tablet. The board wants streamlined presentations. We'll handle the technical overview. He gestured toward the door like I was blocking fire exit access. Your documentation is already integrated into our strategy deck. I glanced around the room. Every department head was there, including Aaron Reed, the CEO's son-in-law who'd been with the company exactly 8 months. Aaron gave me one of those apologetic shrugs that rich kids perfect by age 12. Sandra Pierce, our CTO, was studying her phone like it contained launch codes. The conference room held 40 people easily. Half the seats were empty. I see, I said, closing my laptop. Check your email. The notification sound started about 30 seconds later, phones buzzing across the room like a swarm of digital wasps. I was already walking toward the elevators when I heard Sandra's voice crack. What the hell is this? Before I explain what I sent, let me back up. Because what happened that morning was 5 years in the making. And if you've ever watched younger colleagues take credit for your work while you got passed over for promotions, you'll understand why patience isn't just a virtue. Sometimes it's a weapon. I joined Apex fresh out of Stanford with a PhD in computer science and dreams about changing the world through artificial intelligence. This was 1999, when AI was still science fiction to most people, and the internet was just figuring out how to sell books online. I was 26, brilliant, and naive enough to think merit would speak for itself. The first few years were everything I'd hoped for. I worked 12-hour days developing prediction algorithms that helped optimize server loads across our client networks. My pattern recognition systems could detect network intrusions 6 hours before they caused any damage. Every patent I filed added another layer to Apex's intellectual property fortress, and my salary reflected my contributions. I remember the exact moment I realized how naive I'd been. It was December 2003, during my first performance review with real promotion potential. I just delivered a breakthrough in automated load balancing that saved our largest client $2.3 million annually in server costs. The math was simple: my innovation, their savings, my advancement. My manager at the time, a guy named Carl, who'd been promoted 3 times in 5 years despite never writing a single line of functional code, delivered the news with practiced corporate sympathy. Your technical contributions are exceptional, Garrett, but leadership requires a broader skill set. You need to work on your visibility. Visibility. That became the buzzword that haunted my career for the next decade. Not innovation, not results. Not the fact that I'd solved problems other engineers couldn't even understand visibility. So I started paying attention to who got promoted and why. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for. The engineers who advanced weren't necessarily the smartest or most productive. They were the ones who knew which meetings to attend, which projects to attach their names to, and most importantly, which senior executives to cultivate relationships with. I tried playing that game for about 2 years. I attended networking events where middle managers discussed golf handicaps and stock options. I scheduled coffee meetings with department heads who barely understood the technology they were managing. I volunteered for cross-functional projects that had more to do with corporate politics than actual problem solving. It was exhausting and ultimately pointless. I wasn't built for office politics. My brain operated in algorithms and data structures, not office relationships and strategic name-dropping. While I was forcing small talk about weekend plans, other engineers were getting assigned to the high-visibility projects that led to executive recognition. The real problem started when Bryce got hired as department head in 2019. He arrived with an MBA from Wharton, a track record of optimizing human resources, and absolutely no understanding of the technical work that actually drove our department's success. But he had something I'd never developed, an instinct for corporate advancement that treated other people's work like raw material for his own career construction. The first time it happened, I convinced myself it was a misunderstanding. I'd spent 6 months developing a machine learning framework that could predict hardware failures 72 hours before they occurred. The potential savings were enormous, $23 million annually, and prevented downtime across our client base. I run the calculations 3 times, tested the algorithms on 6 months of historical data, and delivered a comprehensive technical specification that covered every implementation detail. I presented the complete framework to Bryce in a private meeting, walking him through the mathematical foundations, the data processing pipeline, and the deployment architecture. He asked intelligent questions, took detailed notes, and praised the innovation's potential impact on our client relationships. 2 weeks later, I watched him demonstrate his predictive maintenance solution to the executive team. My name appeared nowhere in the 47-slide presentation. The mathematical formulas I'd derived were presented as strategic insights. The implementation timeline I'd calculated became his project management framework. When I approached him afterward, his response revealed exactly how naive I still was about corporate politics. The conceptual framework emerged from our collaborative discussions, he said, not even bothering to look away from his laptop screen. You handled the technical implementation, but the strategic vision was mine. That's how innovation works in a managed environment. I stared at him, reorganizing my patent portfolio papers while my brain processed what had just happened. The entire framework from initial concept to deployment specifications had been my design. But challenging your immediate supervisor's version of reality is career suicide, especially when you're 44, and the job market treats experienced engineers like expensive overhead. So I documented everything instead. Email timestamps showing when I first proposed concepts, source code repositories with my digital fingerprints on every algorithm, patent filing dates that proved ownership of foundational ideas, meeting recordings where legally permissible. I built a paper trail more detailed than an FBI investigation, because I had a feeling this wasn't going to be an isolated incident. I was right. Over the next 18 months, a pattern emerged that would have been hilarious if it wasn't destroying my career. I would identify a technical challenge, develop a comprehensive solution, present it through proper channels, and watch Bryce repackage it as his strategic initiative. My real-time fraud detection system became his security optimization project. My automated testing protocols became his quality assurance framework. My database architecture improvements became his infrastructure modernization strategy. Each time, the process was identical. Private meeting where I explained the technical details, 2 weeks of silence while he evaluated the proposal. Then a polished presentation to executive leadership where my innovations were presented as examples of his visionary management. Meanwhile, Aaron Reed joined the team fresh from his MBA program at Northwestern. Nepotism has always existed in corporate America, but watching the CEO's son-in-law get assigned to special innovation projects while I handled the complex technical work felt like watching someone else eat the meal you cooked. Aaron was intelligent enough and probably decent enough as a person, but he had that particular confidence that comes from never worrying about mortgage payments or job security. The breaking point came 8 months ago, during what I now think of as the AI framework incident. I'd been working evenings and weekends on something revolutionary, an artificial intelligence system that could analyze customer behavior patterns and predict purchasing decisions with 87% accuracy. This was an incremental improvement. This was breakthrough technology that could fundamentally change how companies approach client relationships. I'd spent 4 months developing the mathematical foundations, another 3 months coding the implementation, and 2 weeks preparing a presentation that explained every technical detail. The potential revenue impact was staggering, minus $34 million annually for our existing client base, with scalability potential that could transform entire industries. I scheduled a meeting with Bryce for a Thursday morning in March. I arrived 15 minutes early, carrying 3 printed copies of my technical specification and a laptop loaded with demonstration software. The presentation took 90 minutes. I walked him through the neural network architecture, the data preprocessing algorithms, the prediction accuracy metrics, and the deployment timeline. He asked thoughtful questions about scalability and asked me to email him the complete technical documentation for further review. I should have known what was coming next. The quarterly technology review meeting was scheduled for the first week of April. This was the big presentation where department heads showcased their team's innovations to the board of directors. I'd been preparing for months, assuming my AI framework would be the centerpiece of our department's contribution. When I arrived at the conference room that morning, Bryce intercepted me at the door. "Leadership wants focused presentations today," he said, adjusting his tie with the practiced confidence of someone who'd never had an original technical thought in his life. "Give me your materials. I'll incorporate the key points into my overview." I hesitated. Every instinct told me to keep my presentation folder, walk into that meeting, and present my own work. But 20 years of corporate conditioning is hard to overcome. You don't challenge your immediate supervisor in front of the board. You don't contradict the established hierarchy, you trust the system to recognize merit eventually. So I handed over my presentation folder and took a seat in the back row. The next 4 hours were educational in the worst possible way. I watched department heads present genuine innovations, strategic initiatives, and measurable achievements. Marketing discussed their client acquisition campaign that had generated $12 million in new contracts. Sales presented their expansion into European markets. Operations showcased their efficiency improvements that had reduced costs by 15%. When Bryce's turn came, he delivered a polished overview of our department's strategic technology initiatives. My AI framework got exactly 3 minutes of discussion, presented as a preliminary concept that required additional market research and technical validation. The mathematical breakthrough I'd achieved was reduced to buzzword-heady bullet points. The 87% accuracy metric became promising preliminary results. The framework was shelved for further development. 6 weeks later, Aaron presented his customer behavior prediction system to the same board of directors. My framework with cosmetic changes and a rebranded user interface, the mathematical foundations were identical. The prediction algorithms were my code with variable names changed. Even the accuracy metrics were the same, minus 87% prediction reliability. The project was immediately approved for full implementation with a $12 million development budget. When I confronted Bryce about this, his response revealed exactly how the system actually worked. Aaron's approach incorporated market research and business strategy that your version lacked, he said, not bothering to look up from his computer screen. This is business, Garrett. Results matter more than who came up with what first. Your technical contributions are valuable, but leadership requires a broader perspective. That night, I sat in my home office surrounded by 23 years of technical documentation. Patents that had made Apex hundreds of millions in licensing revenue, while my salary remained essentially static. Innovations that had saved clients massive operational costs while I watched colleagues advance around me based on their skill at internal networking rather than actual problem-solving ability. Something fundamental shifted in my perspective. If this was really just about business results, I would show them exactly what those results cost when the person generating them decided to take his expertise elsewhere. I started working on something completely different, not an improvement to existing Apex technology, but a comprehensive reimagining of how artificial intelligence could handle complex data analysis across multiple industries simultaneously. I developed it entirely on my personal time, using my own equipment, accessing zero company resources. Every line of code was legally mine. Every algorithm was documented and timestamped on my personal systems. But more importantly, I started building connections outside of Apex. I reached out to former colleagues who had left under similar circumstances. Roger Sterling, who quit after his cloud architecture designs were systematically attributed to managers who couldn't explain the basic technical concepts. Mitchell Barnes, who resigned when his startup acquisition strategy was presented by the business development VP as an example of strategic leadership vision. Each conversation revealed the same toxic pattern. Apex had built a corporate culture that systematically appropriated the intellectual contributions of its most innovative employees while rewarding those who excelled at taking credit rather than generating actual value. But these conversations also revealed something else. A network of talented, undervalued professionals who understood exactly what was happening and were tired of accepting it as normal. 3 months before that conference room confrontation, I approached Priscilla Anders, a venture capital partner at Thornfield Ventures, who specialized in AI startups disrupting established markets. I'd done my research. She had a track record of funding technical teams with proven expertise rather than charismatic founders with compelling pitch decks but no actual product. Her office was in Palo Alto, one of those converted warehouses with exposed brick and industrial lighting that screams we fund the future. I arrived carrying 2 presentation folders. The first contained my enhanced AI framework along with a comprehensive business plan. The second contained something more valuable, detailed profiles of experienced engineers who were ready to leave their current positions for the right opportunity. This could transform multiple industries, Priscilla said after reviewing my technical documentation for 45 minutes. She understood the mathematics behind my algorithms, which was unusual among VCs I'd encountered. But why leave a secure position with 23 years of seniority and probably excellent benefits? Because I'm not just leaving, I replied, opening the second presentation folder. I'm taking the institutional knowledge that actually drives innovation. Her expression changed when she saw what I'd compiled. 8 senior engineers, each with 15+ years of experience, each with a documented history of having their contributions systematically reassigned to colleagues with better political connections. Combined, we represented 180 years of accumulated technical expertise that Apex had taken for granted. Now that's interesting, she said, leaning forward. And Apex will likely continue taking credit for innovations they didn't create until they realize those innovations have stopped coming. Exactly. And by then, we'll have built something better with a team that actually values each other's contributions. The funding conversation took 6 weeks. Not because of technical concerns, Priscilla's technical advisory board confirmed that my AI framework was at least 18 months ahead of anything currently available. The delay was due diligence on team composition and market positioning. She wanted to understand exactly how we plan to compete against established players and what our sustainable competitive advantages would be. 2 weeks later, I had a $15 million Series A commitment. Tech Vanguard Solutions was officially funded. 1 month after that, I had office space leased in South San Francisco, legal agreements signed with my future team members, and provisional patents filed for my enhanced AI framework. Through careful networking, I'd identified 12 major clients who were actively considering switching from Apex due to bureaucratic inefficiencies and disappointing technical support. The client acquisition process was more straightforward than I'd expected. These weren't cold sales calls. These were conversations with technical directors and IT managers who had been frustrated with Apex's service delivery for months. When I demonstrated Tech Vanguard's AI capabilities alongside our team's technical credentials, the response was consistently positive. "We've been asking Apex for these features for 18 months, said Janet Morrison, the CTO at Meridian Financial Services. "Their account manager keeps promising roadmap prioritization, but nothing ever gets delivered. When can you start implementation?" By December, I had provisional agreements with 8 major clients representing $34 million in annual recurring revenue, contingent on Tech Vanguard's official launch and successful initial implementations. Everything was positioned, I just needed the right moment to execute. The executive meeting's senior staff only comment provided exactly that trigger. Learning that Aaron would be presenting the quarterly technology review showcasing frameworks that included my appropriated work crystallized my decision. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about professional dignity and building something authentic. I spent that weekend preparing my final communications. Resignation letters for myself and my 8 colleagues, carefully worded to avoid any legal complications. Client transition agreements that had been reviewed by Tech Vanguard's legal counsel. A press release announcing our launch, scheduled for distribution 4 hours after our resignations were submitted. Most importantly, I prepared a comprehensive documentation package proving ownership of the intellectual property that Apex had systematically misattributed. Patent filing dates, source code repositories, email timestamps, meeting recordings, everything needed to demonstrate that their most valuable recent innovations had been developed by engineers who were no longer employed there. That Tuesday morning, I dressed with particular care, navy suit, white shirt, conservative tie. I wanted to project executive credibility during what I knew would be my final interactions as an Apex employee. I arrived early, carrying my patent portfolio folder one last time, not because I expected to present, but because I wanted them to see me holding the documentation of everything they were about to lose. The conference room scene played out exactly as I'd anticipated. 23 years of dedicated technical contribution dismissed with casual bureaucratic language. Colleagues avoiding eye contact, management treating my exclusion as an administrative efficiency rather than professional disrespect. Standing outside that conference room, watching Aaron Reed adjust his presentation materials while Sandra Pierce reviewed her notes, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: absolute clarity about what needed to happen next. The email I sent contained everything they needed to understand their situation. 8 resignation letters, effective immediately. Client transition notifications explaining that Tech Vanguard Solutions would be handling their technical requirements going forward. Provisional patent documentation proving that their most valuable intellectual property had been developed by engineers who no longer worked there. And a press release scheduled for 2 p.m. Pacific time, announcing our launch with $15 million in Series A funding. I felt my phone vibrate as notification sounds echoed through the conference room. By the time I reached the elevator, I could hear voices rising behind the closed conference room door. Not anger, panic. I was in the parking garage when my phone started ringing. Bryce's name flashed on the screen, then Sandra's, then a number I didn't recognize but assumed was Aaron trying to reach me from a conference room phone. I declined every call. The drive to Tech Vanguard's office took 20 minutes through typical Silicon Valley traffic. Roger Sterling was already there, along with Mitchell Barnes and 3 other team members who had submitted their resignations simultaneously with mine. Each had stories remarkably similar to my own years of technical contributions systematically reattributed to colleagues with better political instincts. Did they try to stop you? Asked Helen Torres, our new operations director who had been repeatedly overlooked for promotion despite generating Apex's most profitable client relationships. Bryce chased me to the elevator, Roger said, setting down coffee from the machine we'd installed the previous weekend. Offered me anything I wanted if I'd reconsider. How did that feel? Mitchell asked. Not as good as this, Roger replied, opening his laptop to show us the response he'd already received from our first major client. They had not only confirmed their transition to Tech Vanguard, but had introduced us to 2 additional prospects impressed by our team's technical reputation. Over the next several hours, we finalized our launch strategy in the converted warehouse space that would become Tech Vanguard's headquarters. The press release went live at exactly 2 p.m. Pacific time, just as the trading day was reaching peak activity. By 2:15, financial news sites were reporting on the emergence of Tech Vanguard Solutions and the simultaneous departure of Apex's entire senior engineering team. By 2:45, they were covering Apex's stock price, dropping 14% in after-hours trading. My phone had been vibrating continuously since I left the conference room, but I finally answered when Winston Hartwell's private number appeared on the screen. As Apex's board chairman, Winston rarely involved himself in operational issues, which made his direct call significant. Garrett came his gravelly voice. I think we need to discuss this situation. I'm listening, Winston. I've spent the afternoon reviewing the documentation you provided. The pattern you've outlined is concerning, and I'd like to meet privately to explore resolution options. I appreciate the call, but there's nothing to resolve. My decision is final. His tone shifted noticeably. Perhaps I haven't made our position clear. Apex has substantial legal resources. If you proceed with this venture, we may be forced to take protective measures regarding intellectual property and client relationships. I had expected this response. Winston, everything I've done is legally documented and ethically sound. The innovations I'm taking forward were developed on my personal time using my own resources. Your legal team confirmed they were distinct from company-owned intellectual property when they reviewed the original concepts 14 months ago. Our client relationships include performance clauses and exclusivity agreements. Client relationships that include performance standards your company has consistently failed to meet. I didn't persuade anyone to leave Apex. I simply offered superior technical solutions when they were already considering alternatives. The line went quiet for nearly 30 seconds. What would it take to bring you back? Name your terms. I looked around at my team, talented professionals who had spent years watching their contributions get systematically reassigned to colleagues with better political connections. People who had trusted me enough to risk their careers on something we were building together. There are no terms, Winston. This isn't a negotiation tactic. We're building something authentic here. 6 months later, Tech Vanguard closed our Series B funding round at a $340 million valuation. Our AI framework had been implemented across 23 client organizations, generating average efficiency improvements of 31% and cost reductions exceeding our original projections. We had grown from 8 employees to 47, carefully selecting people who brought both technical competence and collaborative integrity. The true validation came 12 months after our launch when industry analysts began referring to Tech Vanguard's approach as the new standard for AI-driven business optimization. Companies that had never heard of us were requesting demonstrations. Universities were incorporating our methodologies into their computer science curricula. The framework that Apex had dismissed as requiring further development was revolutionizing how multiple industries approached data analysis. 18 months after that conference room confrontation, we completed our initial public offering at a $2.3 billion valuation. The same AI technology that had been shelved for lacking market research and technical validation became the foundation for one of Silicon Valley's most successful IPO launches in recent years. The phone call I'd been expecting came 3 weeks after our public debut. Winston Hartwell's number appeared on my screen while I was reviewing quarterly projections in my corner office overlooking San Francisco Bay. Congratulations on your successful launch, he said, his voice noticeably different from our previous conversation. I'm calling with a formal acquisition proposal. The offer was for $22 billion, representing a substantial premium over our current market capitalization. It would have made every Tech Vanguard employee financially comfortable and established me as one of Silicon Valley's notable success stories. That's a generous offer, Winston. What changed your perspective? Market reality, he admitted. Apex has struggled to replace the institutional knowledge that left with your team. Our development timeline has slowed significantly, and several major clients have indicated they're considering alternatives. I spent the weekend discussing the acquisition offer with my team and our board of advisors. The financial returns would exceed everyone's expectations. Early employees would receive payouts that could fund their retirements. The technology would gain resources for expansion that we couldn't match as an independent company. But something fundamental had changed in how we approached business decisions. Tech Vanguard wasn't just a financial investment or career advancement opportunity. We had built a workplace where innovation flourished because people felt secure sharing ideas without worrying about credit theft. New employees regularly commented on the collaborative atmosphere and mutual respect that defined our culture. "The numbers are compelling," said Roger Sterling during our final team discussion. "But do we want to be absorbed back into the system we worked so hard to escape?" More importantly, added Helen Torres, "what happens to the culture we've created here?" Corporate acquisitions rarely preserve the authentic relationships that make small teams effective. The decision was unanimous. We declined the acquisition offer and instead announced an international expansion strategy funded by our IPO proceeds. 2 years later, I was invited to give the keynote address at the Silicon Valley Technology Leadership Conference, the industry's most prestigious annual gathering. As I walked onto that stage, I saw familiar faces in the audience, including Bryce Hoffman and Sandra Pierce from my former company. But this time, they weren't looking at me with casual dismissal or bureaucratic indifference. They were looking at me with something I hadn't seen in years from former colleagues: professional respect earned through demonstrable results. I began my speech with the same words that had catalyzed everything. "Executive meeting, senior staff only." A murmur ran through the audience as people recognized the reference. "Those words changed my life," I continued. "Not because they hurt, though they did, but because they finally revealed the truth. I had been waiting for recognition from people who would never give it freely. I had been measuring my worth by their standards rather than my own." The auditorium fell silent as I shared the journey from overlooked engineer to industry innovator. I didn't name Apex or specific former colleagues. The story wasn't about them anymore. It was about the power of building something authentic when existing systems fail to recognize genuine value. "The most powerful position isn't the one others grant you," I concluded. "It's the one you build yourself, surrounded by people who understand that true innovation comes from mutual respect, not political maneuvering." Today, Tech Vanguard employs over 400 people across 12 countries. We hold 73 patents and have disrupted business practices in industries from healthcare to financial services. But our real success isn't measured in market capitalization or revenue growth. It's measured in the workplace culture we've maintained, a place where technical merit gets recognized, where collaboration generates innovation, and where people's contributions are valued rather than appropriated. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where your expertise was overlooked, your ideas were taken without credit, or your contributions were systematically undervalued? If you're over 50 and working in a field where younger colleagues seem to get promoted based on networking rather than competence, you understand the frustration I experienced for years. The professional world isn't always fair, but it does reward those who refuse to accept unfair treatment as permanent reality. Sometimes being excluded from someone else's table is exactly the motivation you need to build something better, something that's entirely yours.